Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we are undertaking a deep dive into Ernest Hemingway's 1937 novel, To Have and Have Not. And what we've done is take the source material, the raw narrative, the specific financial transactions, the really brutal setting that Hemingway maps out for us.
Right.
And we're using it to address one core systemic question. How do severe economic inequality and these scarcity-driven systems, how do they fundamentally push otherwise capable, loyal individuals toward criminalization and then ultimately isolation?
And the power of this book, and really the reason we're centering a whole systems analysis on it, is that it's fundamentally not a story about just one man's tragedy or, about inherent criminality.
Not at all. It's a dissection.
It's a dissection, exactly. It's a detailed dissection of an economic system that ruthlessly and almost mechanically separates people into haves and have-nots.
And when that system fails, when the resources just vanish, the formal structures of society, things like law, commerce, social standing, they don't just get blurry.
No.
They become actively rigged against the vulnerable. I mean, the story of Harry Morgan illustrates this perfectly. It shows how moral judgment and labels like criminal, bootlegger, or even that derogatory term rummy used all through the text.
Right, that gets thrown around a lot.
It does. And those labels are often assigned after the structural exclusion, after the lack of basic resources, has already dictated the only available choices a person has left, just to survive.
So our mission today is going to be laser-focused on those systemic forces. We'll be tracking the structural constraints, the incentives those constraints create, and, the outcomes they impose on people like Harry Morgan and his whole community.
We should be really clear here. We are rigorously avoiding any discussion of individual virtue or, blame.
Absolutely. We're treating this novel as a functional map, a perfect case study of economic failure and, I think importantly, how that failure generates predictable violence.
That's the key. Predictable. Okay, so to start, we really have to ground ourselves in the setting.
Yeah, where are we?
Hemingway just drops us right into the throbbing, desperate heart of the Great Depression. We're in Key West and Havana in the 1930s. And again, we're not analyzing Hemingway's personal life or anything.
No, this isn't a biography.
Right. But we absolutely have to examine the material reality he chose to depict, because that reality is the structure of the system we're analyzing.
And that reality is it's defined by scarcity, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one side, you have the working class laborers.
Right.
We're talking about Harry Morgan, who's a highly skilled fishing boat captain, and he's just struggling to keep his commercial charter business afloat. And then you have other community members like Albert Tracy, Harry's mate.
And Albert Tracy, he represents the absolute bottom rung of what you could call legitimate work. He's been reduced to digging sewers for government relief.
That detail, the sewer digging, it's so important for context, isn't it?
It's essential, because Albert Tracy is making $7.50 a week on government relief.
$7.50 a week.
And Harry himself, the protagonist, he actually scoffs at this wage. He notes it's just enough to starve you conks out of here.
Yeah.
So even back in the 1930s, when $7.50 was, technically income,
It wasn't a living wage.
it wasn't designed to be. It was a mechanism of control, of desperation. It keeps the workers alive, sure, but completely subservient.
And just think about the sheer magnitude of the economic gap here. You contrast Albert's $7.50 a week with the insulated elites.
Oh, it's a chasm.
We meet figures like Mr. Johnson, who can casually charter Harry's boat for weeks, spend thousands of dollars, and then just skip town on a plane without paying his massive $825 bill.
For Johnson, that's an inconvenience? Maybe.
Right. For Harry, it is an extinction-level event for his business, for his family. It's everything.
And the indifference is it's staggering. Johnson doesn't just skip the bill. His expensive fishing tackle.
Which is means of production.
Exactly. It's valued at $360.
And Johnson doesn't lose a wink of sleep over this. He's later spotted just sitting there, perfectly content, drinking with the rummy. The system grants him the power to inflict total financial ruin on Harry without facing any consequences. None.
And the geography here is the critical element Hemingway highlights, what we're calling zones of proximity. The wealth isn't abstract. It's not somewhere else. It's right there. It's flaunted.
It's in your face.
It is. You have this immensity of casual wealth, the charter fishing parties, the yachtsmen drinking highballs on deck, talking about their trusts and their investments.
And this is happening literally dockside, right next to utter desperation, beggars, people scrambling for that low-wage relief work, and of course the beginning of the black markets that offer the only real path to capital.
The fact that Harry Morgan, a man who really prides himself on his capability and his independence, has to look across just a few yards of water at a yacht full of these insulated, careless people, knowing that their leisure, their comfort, is funded by the very same system that is currently starving his family. It makes that asymmetry almost unbearable.
Their careless wealth is the direct structural cause of his necessary high-stakes poverty.
That's it, exactly. So if we take all this context, the desperate wages, the casual theft by the rich, the sheer proximity of wealth and ruin, we can really articulate our core analytical thesis here.
Let's lay it out.
The novel demonstrates how a structural economic system, when it fails to provide basic sustenance and security, turns the simple act of survival. It turns it into a transgression.
So it forces capable, hard-working individuals like Harry Morgan, who, he started as an honest charter captain.
That's what he wanted to be.
Exactly. It forces them to cross legal and moral boundaries simply to endure, simply to protect their families from starving.
It's not a choice, it's a funnel. Okay, so let's move into the core analysis. What we see in the narrative isn't some quick spiral into crime.
No, it's very methodical.
It is. It's a calculated, step-by-step progression driven entirely by systemic constraints. I think it's important to trace Harry Morgan's path not as a moral descent, but as a predictable series of rational choices forced on him by a collapsing economic floor.
That's the key distinction, right? We can map this using our framework, focus on the system's constraints, then the incentives those constraints immediately generate, and finally the resulting human outcome.
And the entire journey starts with that single structural collapse, Mr. Johnson's default.
So let's break that down. Economic scarcity as a coercive system. What's the initial structural constraint here?
The system constraint was the catastrophic failure of the formal charter economy, specifically triggered by Mr. Johnson's calculated theft of services.
He wasn't just forgetful.
No, he knew exactly what he was doing. Harry ran the charter for 3 full weeks counting on that money. He was owed $825.
Yeah.
But the loss, and this is critical, it wasn't just the unpaid bill.
Right, there was the tackle.
He also lost that expensive, specialized, heavy fishing tackle, his capacity to work, which cost him another $360 to replace.
So that's over $1,000 instantly ripped out of his operating capital.
And his living expenses. Hemingway makes a point of having Harry check his pocket. He has 40 cents left. And he has a wife and 3 daughters to feed through the looming, slow summer season.
The incentive generated by this, then, is it's immediate, overwhelming financial survival.
It's not about getting rich. It's not about greed. It's about replacing $1,185 in lost income and capacity right now. It is the raw fear of his family starving. And that immediate pressure, it just overrides all of his previous rules.
Which leads to the human outcome, this forced and incredibly fast self-reversal.
So fast, we have to rewind just a day, literally a day, to appreciate the magnitude of this shift. Harry was offered a $3,000 job, a massive sum, to smuggle 3 political refugees.
And what did he say?
He flatly refused. He said, "I make my living with the boat. If I lose her, I lose my living." And he sets this really clear, high-risk boundary. I don't carry anything that can talk. He was committed, to being a legitimate businessman.
But now, his ability to even choose his own risk level has vanished. The system took that choice away from him.
Completely. He immediately goes to his friend Frankie, and his position has it's flipped 180 degrees. It's a pragmatic, chilling statement. He says, "I've got to carry something, Frankie. I've got to make some money."
And he later admits it himself.
He says, "I can't choose now." The system has structurally breached his moral and his legal code, forcing him to accept the exact type of high-stakes risk that he had just rejected.
This transition brings us right to the second critical insight, which is how informal and illegal economies emerge when formal systems exclude. The legitimate world basically told Harry he was worthless, that his livelihood could be stolen without any recourse. So where does he turn?
To the black market, because the black market pays.
So the system constraint here is bigger than just Harry's situation. It's the generalized lack of legitimate, secure, well-paying work.
Exactly. As we noted, Albert Tracy is making $750 a week digging sewers. This level of economic exclusion creates a vacuum. And illegal supply chains, well, they naturally fill that vacuum.
Which creates the incentive, the quick, substantial, though obviously perilous, profit that's only available outside the law.
And the math is just irresistible. Harry needs to replace his lost capital immediately. So he takes the job brokered by Frankie and this character, Mr. Singh, smuggling Chinese aliens.
How much was it for?
He stands to make $100 per head for 12 individuals, a total of $1,200. That single illegal transaction replaces the entirety of the legitimate money Mr. Johnson stole from him.
That's the arithmetic of the black market, isn't it? It's the only place offering a wage that matches the level of desperation.
It is. And the human outcome is the immediate creation and, I think, normalization of these illicit supply chains. We see Mr. Singh, who is this cool, calculating Chinese smuggler. He's operating a complex, multinational business model.
This wasn't some amateur hour operation.
Not at all. Singh was highly professional. But his model was pure exploitation. He was selling passage to the Tortugas. But his compatriots were just going to be dumped near Cuba, never even making it to the U.S. Yeah. It's massive human risk, incredible misery, all in the service of high profit margins.
And the novel shows Harry's rapid progression deeper and deeper into this underworld. He doesn't just stop there.
No, it's a slippery slope. He moves from that alien smuggling job, which turned violent very quickly, to running contraband liquor. And then eventually he gets drawn into the high-stakes, politically charged Cuban Revolutionary bank robbery.
Which is brokered by figures like B-Lips, the corrupt lawyer.
Right. So you see this whole ecosystem spring us up. Organized crime doesn't appear randomly. It materializes precisely to service the demands like profit or just survival wages that the formal economy ignores or actively blocks.
Let's pause here and look at Insight 3 because this is crucial. It details the moral asymmetry between the insulated and the exposed. This really shows how the system protects one class while actively punishing the other.
And the system constraint is so simple, it's almost elegant in its brutality. Unfettered wealth provides complete insulation from the consequences of your actions.
Like with Mr. Johnson.
Exactly. He can inflict financial ruin on Harry, lose valuable equipment, and face zero legal or social retribution. He just goes back to drinking comfortably.
So the incentive that drives the wealthy, the haves, is just pure indifference, self-absorption.
That's it. Their enjoyment, their leisure, their personal comfort is the only priority. And it doesn't matter what the cost is to others who are operating at the very margin of survival.
And the human outcome is this stark demonstration of moral asymmetry. Look at Frederick Harrison.
Oh, he's a perfect example. He's this important administrator vacationing in Key West. He spends his leisure time, his vacation, actively trying to pinch Harry,
who he knows is struggling desperately to feed his family.
Right. And he does it simply because Harry has now become a lawbreaker. Harrison, as a representative of the formal system, is enforcing the law from a position of absolute insulated safety.
Against a man whose life was ruined by a failure of Harrison's own class. Harrison feels righteous about it. Harry just feels hunted.
And the economic disparity that allows for this moral blindness is just astounding. Hemingway gives us a direct comparison that you have to see.
Yachtsman, right.
The wealthy yachtsman, Henry Carpenter. He's introduced worrying about his trust fund income possibly dropping to $200 a month.
Which for him is a serious financial worry.
It is.
Yeah.
It might limit his highballs or his charter tricks, but the novel explicitly contrasts this. That $200 is still, and this is a quote, $170 more a month than the fisherman Albert Tracy had been supporting his family on.
Wow. So the wealthy man's anxiety over a drop in luxury is still magnitudes more than the poor man's entire structural support for his family.
That asymmetry is the functioning mechanism of the entire system. It's what allows it to perpetuate.
And that systemic pressure leads us directly into Insight 4, why criminalization often follows deprivation rather than choice. Harry's story is just a progression of loss that eliminates his legal options one by one.
The system constraint is this compounding structural vulnerability. It's a loss of capacity. Harry is injured while running liquor in Mariel. He loses his right arm.
Which is not a personal failing. It's a direct consequence of the risky work the system forced him into in the first place.
Of course. And then he loses his boat entirely. It's seized based on a wealthy man's affidavit. So now his legitimate business is ruined, and his physical ability to perform basic labor is literally cut in half.
The incentive then becomes this desperate, overwhelming need to replace that lost capacity and income. A man with one good arm can't work a fishing boat properly. It drastically limits his legal employment prospects.
So he's forced to acknowledge this brutal reality that he has nothing left to sell but risk. He calculates very bitterly that all I've got is my cojones to peddle.
That is a devastating moment in the book. When he loses his physical capacity, the system doesn't offer him a safety net. It offers him greater risk.
And his final, fatal human outcome is that decision to steal Freddie's boat to run the bank robbers. It's the necessary, logical conclusion for a man who has lost everything but his willingness to fight.
He makes that raw, survival-based calculation. What the hell worse trouble is there than starving?
His death isn't due to a moral flaw. It's because his body and his business were used up by the system, which then forced him into a choice between imminent starvation and lethal risk.
This precarity, this constant state of existential dread drives the next insight. Isolation as both a cause and a consequence of economic exclusion.
Because when your survival depends entirely on these high-stakes illegal transactions, you simply cannot afford liabilities. You can't.
The system constraint then becomes the necessity of radical, almost paranoid self-reliance. Harry is operating without any legal or social protection.
Which means any vulnerability, any witness, any weak link can get him killed or thrown in prison.
So the incentive is secrecy. It's risk elimination. It's the reduction of all human liabilities.
And this is where we have to slow down and really analyze the brutal psychological impact. Harry's decision to kill Mr. Singh is cold, but it's functional.
He doesn't do it out of passion or rage.
No, he kills Singh, in his own words, to keep from killing 12 other chinks who might complicate the situation or, talk to the authorities. It's a transaction, a horrific one, but a transaction to simplify risk.
And he applies that same logic to his friend Eddie the rummy.
He does. He seriously considers doing away with Eddie, his former mate, because, as he says, he's a rummy, he'll talk, and Harry needs to be all clear. This shows you how the system of illegal work turns human connection into a deadly liability.
The human outcome is this increasing isolation, which is often enforced through violence. The most tragic, chilling example is Albert Tracy.
Albert was Harry's loyal friend, his former mate. But Albert is murdered by the Cuban robbers when he is no longer necessary to the plan.
And Harry sees the body and just knows that his friend was killed because Harry doesn't need no mate for the return trip.
Albert became a witness, an unnecessary liability, and he was eliminated. Isolation by violence is a systemic function of the black market economy.
And that isolation extends to the family unit, too. Harry's wife, Marie Morgan, is left grieving and impoverished, and she's observed by Richard Gordon,
the self-absorbed intellectual writer on vacation.
Right, and he doesn't see a woman suffering immense systemic stress. He sees a coarse big ox or a battleship.
Her grief, her struggle, her physical manifestation of stress, it's pathologized. It's dismissed by the insulated class, which isolates her even further, psychologically and socially.
Which brings us to the final analytical point, Insight 6. The limits of individual resilience inside structurally unequal systems. I mean, Harry Morgan is the quintessential Hemingway hero. He's tough, he's self-reliant, he's hyper-capable.
And yet the system just consumes him.
So the system constraint is that the structure is literally designed to use up and discard loyal, capable men, especially when they lose capacity.
Albert Tracy's the perfect example. He was loyal, he was hardworking, he accepted $5 a day. And Harry himself casually calls him a poor, hungry bastard. But his loyalty means nothing when he's merely in the way of a high-stakes, economically necessary operation.
And Albert's murder is the ultimate tragic human outcome. It's a direct result of Harry's economically forced transgression.
It is. And Harry's individual ethos, his belief that I got no choice in it, that fighting spirit, is eventually shown to be just, tragically insufficient against the overwhelming, continuous structural forces that are arrayed against him.
Which culminates in his famous final realization, that moment of systemic clarity right before he dies. He's struggling to articulate the futility of fighting a rigged structure.
He says, now the way things are, the way they go, no matter what, no. He recognizes that his individual toughness, his effort, it was ultimately irrelevant against the sheer, crushing weight of economic necessity.
He reflects on his whole struggle. A man. I mean, how things are, the way that they've been going. For a while, yes, sure, all right, maybe with luck. A man.
The effort, the capability, the risk, it was all conditional on luck.
Yeah.
And when the system takes your capacity, your arm, and your capital, your boat, the luck just runs out. The system's design is the constant, regardless of how hard the individual fights.
A deep dive into Harry's path, it shows us the how of the system's violence. So now let's explicitly map the entire structure Hemingway created. Let's identify all the key components. The actors, their incentives, the narratives they use, and the feedback loops that keep this whole cycle running.
Okay, let's start with the actors. We can divide them by their primary function in this economic flow. First, you have the laborers. This is the exposed class. Their lives are dictated by physical work and low, unreliable wages.
So Harry Morgan, Albert Tracy, Eddie, and Wesley. The crewman who's often treated as just an easily replaceable asset.
Exactly. Then you have the smugglers and transgressors. Harry is forced into this category, but he's joined by figures like Mr. Singh, who profits from human misery by moving Chinese aliens.
And Pancho and the Cubans, who operate as these political operatives and high-stakes bank robbers. This group exists to fill the vacuum, right? The vacuum of high demand and failed legitimate supply.
Perfectly put. Then on the other side of the ledger, we have the wealthy clients and insulators. These are the people whose lives are defined by their leisure and their capital.
Mr. Johnson, who defaults on his debts. Frederick Harrison, the politician enforcing rules from a safe distance. And those anonymous yachtsmen, Wallace Johnston, Henry Carpenter, the grain broker, they're all completely detached from the consequences of the economic system they benefit from.
And finally, you have the institutions and enforcers. These are the groups that only interact with the system after the economic failure has resulted in visible crime or death.
So, customs, which confiscates Harry's boat, law enforcement, the Cuban shooters, the Coast Guard towing the wreck, the sheriff, they aren't there to prevent poverty. They're there to clean up the bodies and enforce the rules against those who transgressed out of necessity.
Now let's map the incentives. This really clarifies why each group acts the way they do. For the vast majority of the exposed actors, Harry, Albert, Wesley, the sole incentive is survival.
Just survival. They need to eat, keep their boat running, avoid starvation. Everything they do is driven by these basic, fundamental sustenance needs.
Then you have that middle layer, Mr. Singh or Freddie Wallace, the bar owner. They're driven by profit. They are making big business by servicing the illegal demands that the formal economy ignores, whether that's shipping Chinese aliens or running illegal booze.
Their entire business model relies directly on the structural failure of border control and legal employment.
It does. Then the elite class. They're driven by insulation from risk. Mr. Johnson saves $825 by skipping town, completely insulated from the consequences Harry suffers. Frederick Harrison tries to enforce the law from a distance while he's on vacation.
So their goal isn't necessarily profit from the specific system, but maintaining their comfortable, safe distance from the consequences of the underlying economic instability.
That's the core incentive. And the final incentive is enforcement after the fact, which drives the actions of law enforcement and the political actors. The Cuban bank robbers are motivated by securing funds for their best cause, a revolution.
And law enforcement is motivated by confiscating boats and cleaning up bodies to maintain the illusion of order.
This brings us to the narratives, how people justify their own behavior or perceive others. Harry Morgan's main narrative is all about self-reliance, fighting against an overwhelming constraint.
He insists, I got no choice in it. And he maintains that resolve that his family will eat as long as anybody eats. He absolutely refuses to be a beggar.
But the official narrative, the one applied to him by law enforcement and the wealthy, simply criminality. He's a lawbreaker, a bootlegger.
His structural motivation, feeding his family, is completely erased by this simplified moralistic label that the insulated class applies to him.
And we also see the narrative of merit or justification being used by the revolutionaries. The pleasant-speaking Cuban, he explains their bank robbery and murder as necessary means for the best cause, their revolution. Individual violence is justified by the perceived systemic benefit they hope to achieve.
And finally, that pervasive narrative of personal responsibility failure that the wealthy use against the poor. When Captain Willie's passengers see Harry simply as an unfortunate bootlegger, they are implicitly absolving Mr. Johnson,
the wealthy client who created Harry's financial disaster in the first place,
from any moral responsibility. They frame the outcome as Harry's personal bad choices, not the system's failure.
And this entire structure, all of it, operates through a vicious feedback loop. Poverty leads to illegal work, which leads to punishment, which results in deeper exclusion. Harry Morgan's life is the textbook definition of this loop.
Let's trace it carefully one more time. Harry's initial debt and loss of tackle, that's the poverty, pushes him into running liquor and aliens, the illegal work.
He loses his arm and his boat. That's the punishment, the loss of capacity.
And that loss of capacity forces him into even higher risk, more desperate jobs, like the bank robbery, deeper exclusion, which leads directly to his death.
Every single attempt he makes to climb out of poverty through illegal work simply results in a heavier penalty, which makes the next transgression not just possible, but necessary.
So why does this system persist?
It persists because those insulated by wealth, the yachtsmen, the Wallaces, the Henry Carpenters, are completely detached. They're literally worrying about the Internal Revenue Bureau or their trusts, while other people are starving yards away from them. Their wealth acts as a perfect sensory deprivation chamber. It prevents them from ever having to acknowledge the human cost.
The structural failure of the scarcity system generates the desperation, and then the wealthy system relies on exploiting that desperation, paying minimal wages, relying on illegal services like smuggling to maintain its own leisure and profit margins.
It's a self-regulating, self-justifying machine.
And the structural dynamics Hemingway identified in the 1930s. I mean, this relationship between scarcity, exclusion, and inevitable transgression, they aren't just historical artifacts, are they?
No, not at all. They recur constantly in modern forms, which is why this book remains such a powerful lens. We're seeing structural recurrence, not just some historical analogy.
Let's start with modern informal economies. Harry's forced move from charter fishing to running liquor and aliens. It feels structurally identical to the necessity that drives participation in today's vast global informal economies, or what some people call the precariat.
Well, think about the arithmetic again. Harry charges $35 a day in the legitimate economy. But when that system defaults on him, he is willing to risk 10 years in jail or death for $1,200 from Mr. Singh.
So today, the system constraint of stagnant wages, the rising cost of living, the systemic failure of secure employment, it all creates a very similar incentive structure.
We see workers today who are structurally analogous to Harry Morgan. They're forced into the gig economy or illicit underground work, whether that's undocumented labor or just the constant precarity of driving for ride-sharing apps to make rent.
The comment thread is always high personal risk, physical danger, legal peril, exhaustion for quick, substantial, though often temporary, payouts.
And it's all driven by exclusion from secure, traditional middle-class work.
The book also provides a really clear blueprint for the modern criminalization of poverty. Hemingway highlights that the poor are criminalized for seeking survival, while the rich who commit financial theft, like Mr. Johnson, who stole Harry's entire livelihood, suffer zero consequences. They just fly away.
The legal system's focus is always on the visible transgression. Hemingway illustrates this so vividly in that scene at Freddy's bar with the vets from the Keys. They're described as desperate ones, completely brutalized and driven to fighting and drinking.
And how are they viewed?
They're viewed by the sheriff and others as merely a disruptive, law-breaking element, a nuisance to be managed through control and punishment.
And that mirrors a modern structural issue, doesn't it? Visible desperation, homelessness, addiction, mental illness is managed primarily through policing, through incarceration, through fines.
Rather than addressing the structural issues that created the poverty camp in the first place, like the lack of affordable housing or living wages or mental health support.
The crime and the chaos are the highly visible symptoms, yet the focus remains only on punishing the symptoms,
which ensures the underlying structure of scarcity remains completely intact.
And this all ties back to that pervasive framing of structural barriers as personal failure. Hemingway uses the labels rummies, like Eddie and McWalsey, and conks, like Albert, to provide a shorthand for moral or mental weakness.
And those labels serve a critical systemic function. They assign the struggle to the individual's character defect, rather than to the economic environment that created them. It's a way of letting the system off the hook.
Harry himself is a victim of this labeling structure. The loss of his right arm is a profound structural barrier. He physically cannot operate his business properly anymore.
Yet the system has no built-in tolerance, no adjustment mechanism for physical impairment or disadvantage. Instead of receiving support, his impairment forces him back into the most physically risky jobs, requiring him to peddle his cojones because the system has rendered his physical capacity useless for legitimate work.
That's a powerful structural concept, the system's inability to absorb disadvantage.
It is. If you lose capacity, whether it's physical, financial, educational, or simply geographical, the unequal system guarantees a slide into deeper precarity, regardless of how good or tough you might be as an individual. That label, whether it's rummy or some modern equivalent, is the excuse the insulated system uses to justify its abandonment.
The ultimate aim of crisis in perception is to flip that script, to look beyond the individual narrative and see the systemic wiring. And to have and have not provides a near-perfect model for doing just that.
It absolutely forces us to reconsider the idea of systems versus individual blame. Harry Morgan is not defined by innate villainy. He's defined by his constraints, his debt, his arm loss, the lack of secure work.
His initial desire, his honest desire, was to be an honest charter captain, a legitimate businessman.
The system made that path impossible. It did so by systematically stripping away his capital and his physical capacity.
Furthermore, the book shows how scarcity drastically reshapes perception and behavior. When money and safety disappear, basic human behavior shifts from, moral consideration to cold, functional calculation.
Think about Harry's decision to kill Mr. Singh again. It is shocking, but it is not evidence of innate psychopathy. It is a calculated, survival-driven response to eliminate risk and simplify a highly dangerous, economically necessary transaction.
Under that extreme pressure, the perception of human life changes from a moral value to a risk factor that has to be managed.
He needed to be all clear to survive. The system created the necessity for that coldness.
And this analysis is vital when we address why isolation is treated as moral failure instead of systemic outcome. Let's return to Marie Morgan, Harry's wife.
When she is viewed by Richard Gordon, the privileged writer, as a coarse big ox while she's agonizing over her husband's fate, it demonstrates a complete failure of perception.
She's enduring extreme economic and psychological stress. She is physically coarsened and grown heavy, as Gordon observes.
But Gordon, the writer, immediately reduces her physical reality to a literary trope of domestic failure. He sees it as a sign that she has lost her finer qualities due to her hard life.
Instead of acknowledging that her physical stress, her exhaustion, her grief are the direct results of crushing, relentless economic pressure.
And that is the core crisis in perception we investigate. The wealthy and insulated class cannot see the underlying humanity or the structural causality in the struggle. They only see the flaws, the drinking, the fighting, the coarseness, and they immediately assign those flaws to individual character failure.
Which thereby justifies their own insulation and allows them to avoid any responsibility for the system that created the conditions in the first place.
This deep dive really reinforces the continuity of our project. By using this book to reveal the underlying economic mechanics that force individuals into impossible high-risk choices, we highlight a recurring truth. Systems create the environment, and individuals simply react to the incentives and limitations placed upon them.
Harry Morgan was a capable man, but his world was structurally designed to break him and then profit from the broken pieces.
So, to summarize what to have and have not helps us see differently about economic inequality. It is not a benign condition.
Not at all. It is a violent, coercive, and potentially lethal force. It forced a man of capacity and self-reliance, Harry Morgan, to systematically break his own rules just to secure basic sustenance for his family.
The novel also redefined survival under constraint. For Harry, survival wasn't some noble individual struggle against nature. It was a series of forced transgressions, each one pushing him deeper into the hole created by the failures of the formal economy.
His path was a countdown, wasn't it? Ticking down from the moment Mr. Johnson skipped town.
Absolutely. And the final tragic lesson is about the limits of individualism. Harry's dying realization, that fragmented philosophical thought he struggles to articulate, it just encapsulates the structural truth.
A man. I mean, how things are, the way that they've been going. For a while, yes, sure, all right, maybe with luck. A man.
Individual toughness, self-reliance, sheer effort. At the end of the day, they're irrelevant when the foundational system itself is rigged against basic sustenance and capacity replacement.
The system is designed to use up and discard the Harry Morgans of the world, making his sacrifice necessary to maintain the leisurely existence of the Johnsons and the wealthy yachtsmen,
who just continue their comfortable lives, completely insulated from the consequences of their own actions.
The ultimate reflection the novel leaves us with is this. Hemingway shows us that desperation is a predictable engine of the black market and illicit economies, and the violence, the chaos, and the moral compromises that we attribute to individual failure
are often just the visible, bloody symptoms of a perfectly functioning, unequal economic system.
It forces you to ask a really difficult question.
If the system structurally guarantees that a percentage of its citizens must choose between criminality and starvation, is the resulting crime truly an individual failure? Or is it a required and indeed an essential structural outcome for the system to maintain its current division between the haves and the have-nots?
The analysis performed today was based on the systems depicted in To Have and Have Not by Ernest Hemingway. We strongly encourage you to read the book or borrow it from a library.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.